So, 3, 2, 1. Thaddeus Russell is my guest today. How you doing, man?
I'm good. Good to be here.
I'm going to try to get a little bit of my fanboy stuff out of the way, but it's always interesting when you've got somebody that you've heard and then you've kind of seen on the computer, and then they're sitting right here in front of you. I get to actually ask you questions live, Professor.
Touch me, Adam. It's okay. We're good. We're good.
It's real. Very good. So, I'm going to assume that anybody clicking on this and listening sort of knows who you are, and we got started just a little bit late, and we got sort of a hard out here in like an hour and a half. So I kind of want to dive into it a little bit, and God, there's just so much where I could go with this, but I've got a couple talking points, but if we go kind of off and just whatever the conversation is, that's cool. If I were, and I am, a fan listening to this, I would have to start by asking you about being on Joe Rogan.
Okay.
All right. So, I think it's got to be, if not the most popular, one of the most popular podcasts and YouTube shows. And you've been on 3 times, right? Mm-hmm. So tell us about, like, how'd you get hooked up with Joe? And then what's he like? What's it like being on the show? The studio is supposed to be amazing. Like, tell us all about that.
I want to give a shout out to a young man named Jacob Main.
Okay.
Who... one day, I guess it was I forget what year that was, the first time I was on that show, but Jacob, who I think was 18 years old at the time, and was a fan of mine, I guess, and a fan of Joe Rogan's, he tweeted at Joe Rogan that he should have me on his show, and Joe happened to be online right then on Twitter, and so was I, and he DM'd me, and that was that. And nice. I don't know why. I think there were several friends we have in common. Daniele Bolelli in particular, and then Chris Ryan had been on his show many times. Mm-hmm. I think I don't know, he might have heard about me, not through them necessarily, but through their fans or something. But
okay. Just
through the podcast ecosystem and that network, I think I don't even know, he never told me, but I think he might have just had heard of me. So he had some credibility, and he said, sure, come on the show. And that's the way Joe is, and that's what's so brilliant and wonderful about him and his show, is that he is so open to everything, right? I mean, that's really, I think, what marks him as a person and as a podcaster. He's so open to ideas and people, and he's so generous, right. And that's the experience of being on the show too.
He seems, whether you're watching him on stage doing comedy or you listen to his show, like that's just him. Mm-hmm. Like there's the camera comes on and it's da-da-da-da. Like, I mean, is he very much in person when the cameras aren't rolling and everything? Is he just like that guy?
I mean, Joe and I haven't really hung out at all outside of the studio, and we were going to a few times. He invited me to his show a couple times. I couldn't make it, unfortunately, but we would hang out before and after the show. Certainly, yes, he's a great guy. And I mean, another thing that I've sort of learned, I realized I sort of was influenced by him in my own podcasting style. There's very little.
Sorry. He's our only guest that knows how to talk into a microphone.
Yeah.
Everybody else hangs out back here,
right.
So I appreciate that.
That's right. The skill. I got the mad skills. That's with
right.
a Z.
That's right.
So there's very little boundary, I think, between the personal and the public life, right? Or I think less so than in regular media. Mm-hmm. As you know, I talk a lot about very personal stuff on the show, and my guests do as well. And I think that's true for Joe too, right? And I think that's one of the things that sets apart podcasting generally, but his show in particular. Yeah.
So you always sort of hear him make reference to the fact that the studio's got like all kinds of crap in it. Like he talks about archery ranges and gyms and all kinds of stuff. I mean, so when he books you, you fly into LA, you go to this place, like, is it, just describe it for us.
So
I promise the whole time we won't talk about the JRE, but again, I'm just thinking, like, as a normal person that probably will never get. I jokingly call this show Rogan for the rest of us, because not everybody is gonna get to go on that program, but I think most of us are fans.
So a spaceship arrives at your house at about 7 a.m. And archers greet you at the doors of the spaceship with magical bow and arrow.
Oh please, if there were aliens, Rogan would be the first one to tell us. Everybody would know that.
This is true. So no, I was living in LA, so I would just drive to the studio. But yeah, he has a studio in the San Fernando Valley. But that was his old studio. He's built a brand new studio complex, which you know about, I'm sure, I guess in the last year or so, which I haven't been to, but I've heard about because my friend Daniele was on the show, and he told me all about the place, and it sounds pretty amazing. Apparently there's an archery range in it that's like a full-scale archery range indoors.
That's what they say.
And a full martial arts, of course, dojo and all that. Yeah, so yeah, no, Joe knows how to live.
Yeah,
that Joe and that show are aspirational, right? So I think a lot of people watch the show and they want to emulate him because they see a good life, and I think he does have a good life. Right? And I think he shows what the good life is for a lot of people.
So that show is definitely how I first came to know who you were, and it led me to look into your work, Renegade History and Renegade University, and all the stuff you do, and Unregistered. We'll of course have links to all that down below this one. But one of the reasons that the first class I ever took of yours, and I've taken all the classes on Renegade that are taught by you. The first class I took was the postmodernism class, because on one of the appearances on Joe Rogan, you were one of the first people I ever heard sort of directly confront sort of Jordan Peterson, who is worldly popular and he's written all kinds of really good stuff, and but you sort of were taking him on, and mostly his take on postmodernism and Marxism and all that. So it's been a while since that that show, but I mean in general, what's your take on Jordan Peterson, good and bad?
Jordan Peterson. Well, he came to fame with this speech law in Toronto, or Ontario, I guess it was, but that was essentially forcing the professors at the University of Toronto to use particular pronouns when requested by students, right? That were basically made up pronouns, right? And I was fully, and still am fully, in solidarity with Jordan Peterson on that. I think it's, I am a big free speech guy, and that's an obvious attempt. It's a totalitarian, move by the state government there, or the provincial government there, to force people to speak in certain ways, right? That's the last thing you want government to do, isn't it? To determine what we say. And so I absolutely was on his side, even though I have certainly very different ideas about the trans issue and trans politics. But yeah, I was with him on that. But then he started to rant, and I'm going to use that word because he rants about this thing he was calling postmodernism as the root of all evil, and more importantly, the root or the cause of this sort of social justice warrior politics and ethos that's been so dominant sort of in left-wing politics on campuses. That made no sense to me, because I had been Michel Foucault was a major influence on me, one of probably the most important postmodernist, and Peterson actually singles him out quite often, even though he's clearly never read much of Foucault at all, if any, and clearly has not read of any Derrida or Lyotard or any of the rest of what he's talking about. He is also recently exposed for not having read Marx, which is really not a good look when you are running around the world talking about Marxism. Now, I happen to agree with him largely on Marxism. I'm very much in agreement with him on Marxism. Certainly as a political movement in the 20th century, I agree with him 100%. But he was exposed in his debate with Slavoj Žižek in having never read anything other than the
I'm sorry about that.
It's okay.
Yeah, let's see if we can get that switched off.
And it's pretty much clear that he never read anything other than the Communist Manifesto, which was a pamphlet written by Marx. And having never read Capital or any of other Marx's major works, no serious scholar of Marx at all considers the Communist Manifesto to be representative of Marxism. It's really his sort of political cri de coeur. It's not his analysis of capitalism, which, even though has its problems, I think is still to this day, I think it's the most brilliant work of social science. Regardless of what you think of Marxism, it's just absolutely brilliant and needs to be read and studied. And Peterson had not read any of it, clearly, and that's disgraceful. To be a public intellectual and to rant and rave about major works of scholarly thought and never having read them. He is his, for him, I think for a lot of people, for millions of people now, what they think of as Marxism, postmodernism come from Jordan Peterson. That's how they know those things, and that's a problem for me. I'm not interested in defending Marxism terribly, but I certainly would like people to understand it. But postmodernism, I think, is very important, and the way that I read it and the way that I use it, I think, is potentially liberatory for a lot of people.
Yeah, and you have this course, on Renegade, and I would recommend to anybody. And as we talk more in the podcast, I'm going to bring up things that I've heard Thad say that are just are really cool, and you can get more information by kind of going through those classes. But one of the things that I think, and this goes back into what I do for a living, right, is that the number one complaint I get from adult patients is I hate my job. And I always tell people I don't have a pill for that. And so burnout is really, because I'm a private practice doctor. I see people that are fairly healthy. But high functioning and highly educated people. And so I think that these words get thrown around. And one of the things I like about you is that I feel like you're a little more plain spoken. And I was re-listening to some Jordan Peterson, and I feel like these terms get thrown around, and I feel like I need to pause and get a dictionary. And the reason I mentioned the thing about burnout is I think a lot of people hear someone give a very intelligent sounding sentence, and then they're like, well, he just said 5 things in there that I'm not really sure what that means. You know what? I'm too tired to look all this up. So postmodernism gets thrown out, and Marxism gets thrown out, and teleological, and all those sort of these words that kind of, I think people that have been to college are like, I think I heard that once in a lecture, but just whatever. I'm too stupid to kind of engage this. And I feel like you do a nice job of kind of breaking that down. This is nearly an impossible task, but if you had to try to break down the Thaddeus Russell take, the correct take from your perspective, obviously, on sort of postmodernism or postmodern thought, like what would that be for people that don't want to have to read tons of Derrida and Foucault?
Yeah, I would say for me, the way that I read it and the way that I use it, it boils down to 2 things: skepticism and agnosticism. So I think it is simply, for me and my values, okay, and for those who share my values, all right, so this is not a universal claim. I think that skepticism toward certainly authority figures, but I think toward any claim to authority, which includes all truth claims. Even if it's a cashier at the local CVS, if she makes a truth claim about the existence of God or something in nature, we should be skeptical about it. And same is true for presidents and scientists and professors. Whatever they say, I think we should be skeptical about it. I mean, that to me is sort of the bedrock of intellectualism. And actually, I think intellectualism is really what I stand for more than anything. It's just, unfortunately, intellectualism has gotten a bad rap because of all the asshole academics out there and intellectuals who are not the nicest people usually. So skepticism toward truth claims and claims to authority and authority figures, most certainly, right? And then agnosticism, which is simply, we don't know. We don't know whether there's God. I mean, that's where agnosticism started.
Sure.
Rather than a claim that God does not exist, which is in itself a truth claim, right? And I've shifted on that, actually. I used to say there is no truth, and now I say I don't know if there's a truth or an objective reality. Why that sounds absurd to a lot of people. I've gotten plenty of hate for saying that, especially on the last Rogan Experience, an avalanche of hate for 2.5 years, which I think is really amazing, because I'm the guy who argues that slaves were more free than whites. But for some reason, when I got on his show and said that race and gender are a social construct, that's what drove people nuts. I still don't know. Maybe as a psychiatrist, you can explain this to me, why that was so upsetting to so many millions of young men in this country, which, that's Rogan's audience. I mean, maybe there's something about that. But anyway, so agnosticism is simply, I don't know. There might be a God. I've never seen evidence of his existence for sure, but it can't be disproven either, ever.
Right.
Ever.
Right.
So why stake your claim on one side of that or the other?
Right. I think one of the problems, and I have a master's degree in religion. It was before I was a doctor.
Yeah.
I think one of the problems with the term agnosticism is that people assume believer, atheist, perfectly in the middle agnostic, 50%, either way. And I think that Dawkins does a nice job in God Delusion of presenting his 7-point scale. And so then he'll talk about that he began out by saying that he's a 6, on the scale, because of course you can't say 100% there's no God, but and then he'll say, because he's trying to be clever, oh, I'm a 6.9, and Sam Harris, who we'll get to in a minute, will say the kind of the same thing, which is it's that all agnosticism is not simply it's right in the middle. It definitely could go either way. And we were just talking beforehand, that it's Dawkins will say, and I've kind of moved to this as I've gotten older and learned more about science, where, so yes, you can't make an absolute truth claim there is no God. You also can't say there are no fairies and no unicorns and which God? I mean, it could be Wotan or Zeus or Thor. Why is it necessarily the God of the Bible? And I think that comes back to a little bit about what you said, maybe, and I don't know for sure, but why is Rogan's audience so triggered? And I think part of it is because people, you're the historian, but between you and Dan Carlin, I feel like I just consume this stuff because it makes my brain happy. It's like thinking about aliens or something. Like I'm probably not going to know, but it makes my brain happy to think about. I think that people have a hard time seeing anything other than what they've kind of grown up with and accepted that this is the way it is. So you'll see articles that say Native American tribes had 5 accepted genders. Well, that blows the mind of a 2019 American because I mean, and that's just not.
I didn't even know that, by the way.
That's just not what. Well, I mean,
I knew that's true in the South Pacific and much of Asia, that there are multiple genders legally in many countries in Asia, and that blows people's minds as well, right? So how do we know that they're wrong and we're right?
Well, exactly. Yeah. That's the thing, and I don't want to misquote the article, so I'll try to find it and put it in the description box below.
That's great.
This.
Love it.
But I know I read a thing about it recently, and I mean, we guess you could say it's fake news, but again, like it's the perspectives that we have now, and then. What's it going to be like in 100 years and 1,000 years? I think that's why I think philosophy is so interesting, because I think the historian philosophers such as yourself has to wrestle with that a little bit to go, we're so emboldened to say it's that, but is it going to be that tomorrow? It wasn't that yesterday.
That's right. So I said this last night in my talk in Des Moines. 100 years ago, or 200 years ago, certainly. This table to everyone was completely solid, right? But now we know, if you believe in atomic theory, that this table is roughly 50% empty space, right? There's space between the atoms, right? So, I mean, that's the current theory about what this is made of, right? What seems to be, even solid steel, right, is still made of atoms, according to this theory. Right. Now, this theory is brand new in human history. It takes up, one little speck of the timeline. So it may very well be true, but it seems to me to be the height of arrogance to assume that we, for the first time in human history, we're the first humans who have ever lived to be right about these things, because we were completely bass-ackwards wrong about it, apparently just 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Not to mention the theory of gravity, which is constantly being revised as well. How do we know that we are right this time?
Right.
Or how do we know about the heavens, right? When the sun used to revolve around the earth, according to everybody.
Right.
Not that long ago, right?
And to say otherwise was a lethal statement.
You got burned at the stake, or thrown out of the church, or bad things happened to you, right? You were considered to be at best a fool for believing that the earth revolved around the sun. That was at best, right? Yeah, so heresy can take many forms.
Yeah. And my goal was not to go down a religion rabbit hole here, but
but it is all a religion, right? So that's it's
sure.
religious thinking. So that's what we call scientism, is what you were talking about, the treatment of science as a religion. Now, I love science the way that we understand it and think about it and use it in everyday life. I mean, I love the fact that scientists created this thing that we call computers and airplanes that got me here, and cars that are taking me to Chicago today, and all the rest of it. Of course, now am I 100% sure that any of that is true and real and happening? No. I mean, but I operate as if it is until I find out otherwise. But the idea that science is a direct avenue, or an avenue at all, to truth, the assumption that science is an avenue to truth, has to be questioned. Just questioned. And that is guess what? Scientists do for a living. That's actually what scientists do. They dispute, revise, and overthrow scientific truth claims all day, every day. That's what you do as a scientist. You don't just accept the truth about something. You know this, right? As you're a scientist yourself, right? Yep. So you don't just assume that anything is correct, even if it's the theory of gravity or the atomic particle theory, right?
Right.
So that's why I don't understand what all the brouhaha is about me saying these things, because I think I'm saying what scientists themselves say. It's the treatment of science as a religion. So before the Enlightenment, the avenue to truth was the church. To find truth, you went through the priests and the Pope, or the church, or the Bible, right? To find out what the truth was. That's what everybody assumed, right? And now we assume, at least in, the educated world, right, that it's through science. Science will lead you to truth. Now, will science lead us to truth about social relations? Will it lead us to truth about how we should organize society, how men and women should relate, whether sex should be illegal, whether prostitution should be illegal, whether drugs should be illegal, whether we should go to war with Syria? How will scientists, should we give over those decisions to scientists because they have the avenue to truth? They know how to find truth and objective what's real in the world. They know how to measure things and be exact. So we should just give it over to scientists, shouldn't we? Marx is the one who coined the term social science, and I just was defending Marx, and I'll say something bad about him. That's a totalitarian idea.
Okay.
Right? Social science. I'm sorry, but you're never going to make me into a rat in a lab. You're never going to use me and my body and what I do for your social experiments. Thank you very much. And by the way, you're not going to be able to predict what I'm going to do next.
Right.
And that now we're leading into Sam Harris and his idea about free will.
I was going to say this is a beautiful segue into talking about Sam Harris. But no, I agree with you. And the other thing too is even if you allowed yourself to be that rat, it's the Thaddeus Russell rat. The Cooper Hopkins rat, the Adam Woods rat would not necessarily respond the same way, which we're talking about inorganic chemistry. Mm-hmm. Although, on this planet, that's one of the things when I was going through my pre-med, I used to call what I'd say the hard sciences and the soft sciences, because in biology is a story. Evolution did this and that, and I believe in all that. But then it's like you get to science, and if you mix this chemical with this chemical and the test tube's not contaminated, this is going to happen every time. You talk about gravity. We know that, but you get into a black hole and the laws of physics break down, and Newtonian physics are gone. And right. I'm not an astrophysicist, but it's very very interesting. But yes, so Sam Harris, who is one of my very very favorites, and again, he makes my brain happy when he doesn't use so many words that I have to pause every 5 minutes and kind of look it up. And he has dressed down Jordan Peterson dramatically a number of times, it seems like to me. But yes, he then kind of finds himself in this science will lead the way. So what's your take on Sam and kind of what he does? You mentioned him in one of your classes. I'm trying to think which one, but then we sort of moved on to actual material. So what do you think?
Sam and I have been disparaging each other publicly without ever directly engaging each other. So I don't really want to continue this too long.
Sure. Have you met him?
No.
Oh, okay.
He refuses to.
That's too bad.
He has said publicly on his own show that he will not speak to me. So, I don't know what to say about that. I have certainly criticized him publicly many times. So I get it. I understand why he has reason to be afraid of me. I can understand that. But, I don't
love that phrase, by the way.
I still don't think that a public intellectual should be turning down invitations to be on interview shows, especially if we're operating in the same world. But that's fine. It's fine. I'd rather not have an ongoing debate with a guy I don't really care about. Sure. Except I do think I care about him in this way, which is that he has a large following, and I do think, unlike Jordan Peterson, I'm not worried about Jordan Peterson, even though I have massive differences with him politically, obviously, and I'm not worried about other members of the intellectual dark web like the Weinsteins and the Gad-Sads, even though I cannot stand Gad-Sad for various reasons, but he's a coward. I'll just say that too. But we can get into that if you want to. It's that he has a huge following among sort of mainstream establishment type liberals, right? And that's kind of his bread and butter. And that's when you get that audience, you are potentially going to be influencing people who have political power. And I'm afraid of that. And why? Because he has argued for many, many years, I am certainly not the only person to criticize him for this, that Islam is inherently violent, inherently jihadist, inherently a threat to all that is good on earth, and needs to be essentially preemptively dealt with. Now, there's a debate about whether he calls for a preemptive nuclear strike, which in one of his books, in one paragraph, he gets pretty close to it, I will say, at least close to that. And he certainly very clearly has stated that we supported every single military intervention in the Middle East that I'm aware of since 2001. And he has certainly not said anything. I don't think he has rejected the idea behind the Iraq War, or the Afghanistan War, or more importantly, the war on terror generally, which for, I think, pretty much all rational people, including a lot of Republicans and members of the Pentagon, those are foolish wars at this point. So even the establishment that's been running those wars, they are backing away from them. But Sam Harris apparently is not, at least the idea of the war on terror. Sure. He may have criticized certain aspects of those wars. But yeah, and so now, this is, so he, I don't know. Again, I don't want to, I can sort of unpack all this stuff, my critiques of Sam Harris if you want, but it's I'd rather not, but
that's fine.
And I want to be fair to him. He's accused me of being intellectually dishonest. So that's the other reason I don't want to sort of if we're going to do this, it would have to be an entire hour to do it, to do him justice. I don't want to do what's been done to me and is done to everyone in this world, sort of quick dismissive critiques.
And that's fair.
But I will say, it's based on a particular reading of the Quran, right? I've seen him do this talk. which is a particular interpretation of the Quran. And that's fine. But to assume that that is the one correct interpretation of a text, any text,
right,
is, I mean, this is sort of English class 101, right? We know that there are multiple reasonable interpretations of any text.
Of anything.
Even if you're not a postmodernist, right? At this point, there's very few people who think there's a single true interpretation of a text. And the surahs that are often cited in the Quran that he cited, as they're not, first of all, there's multiple translations, they've been translated many, many times over centuries and centuries. Right. And, that's first of all. And second of all, it's every translation. I've taught the Quran. I mean, those surahs they're ambiguous, like all text is, but especially those, it's not clear that they're calling for the kind of jihad that Sam Harris says they are. And so right off the bat, I mean, just to claim that there is one single true interpretation of a text, especially one that's that important and that debated, I mean, there's so many schools of Islam, right? And so many interpretations of those particular surahs in the text itself, and of all of its adherents since then. To me, that sort of undercuts him right off, at the beginning, but I do want to say something about scientism, because he is very much a part of that. And that's maybe, I think, the root of the problem here between he and I. Yeah, I think he believes that science is the gateway to truth. It's the way we understand what is real in the world. And he does largely, as far as I can understand it, organize much of society around what scientists tell us. I think that's a fair reading. I mean, if Sam, you hear this, please let me know if I got that wrong. And I don't think he would be shy about saying that. And I think a lot of his followers would say, yes, that's exactly right. And I think we've already discussed why that's very problematic. I don't think scientists can or should tell me who I am and what I will be. And this ties into his idea that there is no free will, right? Because if there's no free will, what we do need is scientists running the place, because we're just cogs in a machine. So we just need foremen, I suppose, to keep the factory going. If we don't have any free will, if I am predictable in some way, then we should just find out what I'm going to do next by looking in my brain through brain scans. Right. Sam, right? Because that's what
fMRI.
That was his thing, was brain scans, which tell us what you're going to do next. And then, well, the good thing is that we find out in Adam's brain, there's a tendency to criminal behavior. So we're going to we should do something, at least talk to you beforehand.
Well, it becomes Minority Report.
Well, that's where I was going.
At that point, yeah.
Now, whether Sam was going there, that's not entirely clear. He hasn't exactly said that, although he has said on his podcast that women who we know have genetic defects should be given a pill. Now, he was called out by his guest at that time as calling for eugenics, and Sam said, I need to look more into that. And I think he should. I think he should read a little bit of the history of these things. I think he's not terribly well versed in history. So yes, eugenics is exactly what he was calling for, and I think that is all part and parcel of being a scientist, right? Scientistic, I should say. Not a scientist. A true scientist would not do that. But being scientistic, of course, for decades, scientists there was a consensus in this country and in England and in Germany in particular, that scientists know how to organize the human society and should be allowed to do so. And so they started to look at people and examine people and look at poverty and think about why certain people are poor, and they came up with this theory that there was a gene that caused people to have characteristics that would make them poor. That's eugenics right there. It crossed race, by the way. Most people who were sterilized, according to eugenics laws in the United States, were white. People don't know this. It was not a racist idea in itself. It was attached to racism by various people, certainly. But the idea was that, there was a defective gene that could cross races, and those people should be sterilized forcibly by court order. So we had about 50,000, mostly women in this country, who were sterilized by court order because they were deemed to be unfit genetically.
What's the time frame of this?
This is in the early 20th century it didn't stop until the 1970s. There was even in the South until the 1970s, there were people getting sterilized. Yes. And other people were incarcerated. This was, again, mostly women, but not entirely. Incarcerated and sterilized, and then, less invasively, they were forced to take birth control and the rest of it. But it was a widespread belief. This was very, very common, and we actually taught the Nazis this. So the Nazis came to the United States in the 1930s and learned from our eugenics scientists how to do these things, and they took many of those lessons and led the Holocaust with it. So Sam, you should probably read about that a little bit.
Yeah. Wow. That was, for someone that didn't want to get into it, I really enjoyed.
I did. I guess I did.
No, I mean, I really enjoyed.
But that was more a history that I think is missing from much of his analysis. That I think would at least challenge many of his ideas, and which we would talk about if you were ever on my show.
Sure. I mean, as a fan of both of you, but as a fan of Sam Harris, I have to say I'm disappointed to hear that, because I've heard people say, as an example, I would never talk with Alex Jones because Alex Jones is crazy, or like, I heard Richard Dawkins say that Bill Nye shouldn't have debated Ken Ham because you legitimize creation science by talking actual science. I still, as a free speech guy like you, I don't like that. I think that I strive on this show to have people of different things. I like to talk to people that disagree with me if we can be polite to each other. Obviously, if it turns into name calling and so forth, but it's too bad, because I would love to hear a conversation with you and Sam. And so not that he cares what I think, but as somebody who, again, buys his stuff and is a fan, I would like to hear that. I wonder, I feel like some of it, and I don't know that this is true, but when you think about him and Christopher Hitchens, and I think some of those people got so beat down by the idea of you can't have morality or meaning to your life if it's not framed in a religious context, specifically in a Judeo-Christian context, that they then sort of backed up, and Hitchens, with all of his sort of cleverness, we would never have made it to Sinai if it hadn't been. And then from there, I think it can slippery slope kind of into what you're talking about, which is, and since we've now proven that you can find morality inherent in whatever, in altruism, now it can be this scientism that you just talked about.
Can we look something up really quick? I'm interested in this. I have a brand new theory that you just spurred in my head. When was God Is Not Great published? Christopher Hitchens' book.
Cooper will find it for us here.
Because I'm wondering if it was written before 9/11.
So yeah, it was.
Okay, so that was the beginning, basically, of what we now call the New Atheist movement, right? That book was a big game changer, and I have lots of friends. It was a major bestseller, inspired Sam Harris, and inspired many of the New Atheist people that you're talking about, and the sort of intellectual dark web generally. And Hitchens is sort of the godfather of that movement, right? Now, let's talk about Christopher Hitchens, actually.
Sure.
This is because he is the godfather, and I have a history with Hitchens and many thoughts about him. My very first published piece of writing was a review of Christopher Hitchens' memoir. This is like way back in the early 90s, I think. And so I've followed his career for a long, long time, and I am a great admirer of his intellect generally, a tremendous admirer of his linguistic abilities.
His debate skills were
His debate skills
sick.
are the best, and it's a joy to listen to someone who can speak like that, and whose breadth of knowledge and comfort and sort of facility with ideas and knowledge and theories is astounding. So I'm a big fan. And now Christopher Hitchens is, who people may not know this, he started out politically as a Trotskyist, a hardcore socialist revolutionary, which is just like my parents. So he comes from my parents' basically political lineage. We're sort of family in that way. I think he might have even been sort of associated with my parents' actual organization in London for a minute, So it's that left wing that I know very, very well. So I actually first knew about Hitchens back in the 90s or 80s. No, I'm sorry, in the 80s, reading The Nation. He was a columnist there, and he would get in these amazing debates with Alexander Cockburn, who was another British Marxist at the time. So this was all sort of intra-left squabbling about certain things, but I could see that he was absolutely brilliant. And he was a lefty across the board, including on foreign policy. He was opposed to all the wars and all the military interventions at the time. And so he was a great hero to me, actually, at that time, because I was a socialist then. I'm not anymore. But, he was, in particular, being anti-war and opposed to the carceral state and all that, and the security state. He was my guy, more or less, politically. And then what happened was, I don't know what the motivation was behind writing God Is Not Great. I don't know why he wrote it then. That's a good question. I'd like to find out why. But he clearly influenced a whole generation of people who became sort of known as the New Atheists, but not famous and non-famous. I mean, I have many good friends who were deeply influenced by that book, who basically got out of the church they were born into because of that book, and got out of family relationships that were not good for them, and got out of thinking about that at all, and became free. They were liberated by it. So thank God for that. Okay. There you go. So that's all.
You can add one more.
That's all great. And that book, I don't know. I haven't read the book. I've read many of his other books, but I don't know what he does with Islam in that book in particular. Does he focus more on Islam than Christianity in that book?
It's been so long. I don't want to say and say it wrong, but it was many years after it was written. Now that I know when it was written,
right.
But to give as short a version as I can, because really it's more about talking with you. But so I was a pastor and an Air Force chaplain, and got close to the war and a combat evac support hospital. Decided I wanted to be a doctor.
Why are you talking to me?
Huh? Yeah.
Damn, man! Wow, this is great. I've made you into the devil. This is good.
Not at all. Not at all. Have me on your podcast. But no. And so then I wanted to be a doctor. I did my post-baccalaureate work, and it was when I was at Duke, getting literally elbow deep into bodies first year, and I really sort of was learning more and more about science, and I realized evolution wasn't bullshit, and that there was a lot of magic that I'd been taught to believe that wasn't really true. I found my way onto YouTube, which was not what it is today, and I found Hitchens lectures and and him saying things that began to expose holes that I have this is my scientist mind, and this is why I like talking to people like you. When you start presenting other things that my mind likes to think about, like I am not married to any of my concepts so much that, and we're going to get to it when we get to Thaddeus Russell blows my mind later in the show, but like that I'm not willing to at least think about sort of this and that, and so he points out these different flaws. And sort of like the timeline. Well, if evolution is true, then heaven waits with folded arms for 96,000 years, and then says, "Now let's intervene in this backwater." His speaking style is so forth. So but he very much, along with Dennett and Harris, and went after Islam. It's funny because I've never heard that thing about he was anti-war, because he was very much a defender of taking out Saddam Hussein, and much to the critics came after him for that. Took down Mother Teresa, at least dressed her down very sort of dramatically. Lady Diana, I mean, just very. That was the one that I knew, I guess. So you give me a history of Hitch there that I didn't know as much about.
So Adam, here's the thing about being an American that most Americans, maybe no Americans, sometimes seems to understand.
Hit me.
That I believe anyway. I'm not claiming this to be true. I'm just saying this is my interpretation, my analysis. This is an empire. We live in an empire. This is a global empire, has been for decades. So we have military bases, 800 of them in virtually every country on earth right now as we sit. We have men and women in the United States uniform in every country right now. Okay, we have massive military presence. We have diplomats. We have businessmen. We have companies, corporations who depend on military protection all over the world right now. This is an empire. We are the dominant media. We are the dominant language. We are the dominant popular culture. We are dominant. Okay, that means, and we want to keep it that way. We meaning the government of both parties, right? Meaning that every question, or at least most big questions, I think, about politics come down to foreign policy because we are so interconnected with the world in that position of being the paternal leader, the authority figure, the cop, globally, right? We're not a dictatorship. This is not outright colonialism as it was, with the British Empire and the Spanish Empire, et cetera, earlier. But it is an empire of management. We're managing the world, and we try to keep it under wraps without having too many boots on the ground. But we certainly have enough, and we have enough to keep that going. So with the new right, I almost said the new right.
The new right.
Because actually they are. I mean, they actually kind of converge with the new right on this, right? And they moved to the right on this. Hitchens wrote this in 97. I am now remembering, yes, he indeed was becoming very, very concerned with Islam, with the rise of radical Islam and political Islam at that time. This was when the war on terror had already started. We'd already had bombings in Africa and elsewhere, and there was already, we were assassinating people on the ground in various countries, right? So that's right. That book was actually very much written to support the war on terror, and I do believe it's disproportionately focused on Islam. I mean, again, people can correct me. I know he's written critiques of Christianity and Mother Teresa, that great book that he wrote about Mother Teresa, which, by the way, I heard that the original title for that was Sacred Cow. But Hitchens used to teach in the same classroom I did at the New School for Social Research, and so I would see him. We would cross paths every day or twice a week when I would teach, and he would come in when I was leaving. But so I have we have lots of mutual friends and stuff. But I never actually knew him personally. But so for whatever reason, unfortunately, Christopher Hitchens decided to promote this war against Islam. He decided somewhere in the 1990s that this was this unstoppable force, that unless it was destroyed militarily, it was going to take over the world. I mean, that was really his argument, I'm pretty sure. And unfortunately, he is so good at making arguments and so persuasive and so eloquent. And then 9/11 happens, 4 years later. And Sam Harris has said this, that's what did it for him. It was the combination of those two things. It was the influence of Hitchens and 9/11. He has said this. This is when he became political. And this is why Sam Harris's historical memory stops in 2001. He doesn't reference anything before 2001. He might notice. Maybe he will from now on. But he does not notice anything before 2001. So the world began in 2001. And so if the world began in 2001, then my God, yes. We have a world of these people who are crazy, who fly planes into buildings. That's so crazy. Why would you not deal with that militarily? Instantly? Of course. Right. He has, to me, sort of the mindset I had for about 5 minutes on the morning of 9/11 when I was living in New York City, and my wife was 8 months pregnant, and I was terrified, as everyone was. And there were rumors of Al-Qaeda blowing up the subway system, and I was taking the subway right under the World Trade Center every day to go to teach at Barnard College. So yes, for a minute I was panicked. We had fighter jets circling the city for weeks. And we were in basically it felt like almost a military state, and the American flags went up everywhere, even in very liberal and left-wing neighborhoods in Brooklyn. All of a sudden there were American flags flying on every stoop on 9/12. It was a close to fascist culture there for a moment there. The post 9/11 moment, someone needs to write about that. It was a very fascistic moment in American history. And it swept up a whole bunch of people, even a lot of good left-wingers who had been anti-war, who had come out of the anti-Vietnam War movement. Even they sort of all of a sudden, like Todd Gitlin and there was a whole crew of a lot of Jewish and particularly intellectuals in New York City who were like socialists and had been anti-war people all their lives, and suddenly they were promoting this big military invasion of the Middle East, which we know what happened with. Right. So those intellectuals, by the way, Paul Berman, Todd Gitlin, they need to be held accounted for right now. They need to take responsibility for that, because they actually were they and Hitchens were the leaders of the left wing. And we're talking about, again, the socialist left. I mean, people from Bernie to the left, the socialist left, who are promoting what became the Afghanistan and Iraq wars, these horrors that seem to be eternal wars. Yeah. So, and then along come a bunch of knuckleheads who've never been political at all, like Sam Harris, who this is all they know. Sure. And I mean politically, he was a knucklehead. I mean, he would say this, I'm sure himself. He was naive, and I think he's politically naive because he's only been doing this for a little while. Unlike some of us who were born into politics, I'm not saying I'm better, but I mean, my parents just happened to be political radicals, so I've always done this. This is like breathing for me. Yeah. And so I kind of understand on that level, and I can cut him a little bit of slack, but I mean, he's a grown-ass man and he's my age. I mean, he needs to sort of read some history before he starts making big claims that can actually influence foreign policy and kill a bunch of people. Yeah. So if he's going to be the next Christopher Hitchens, we're going to have another massive, possibly world war. Yeah. Right? If he leads, if he helps in any way, and I think he already helps in any way in promoting that kind of military occupation and invasion, which I think will happen when the Democrats take over, whenever that is. I do think his ideas will be quite influential. I mean, he's giving big talks in big theaters in Washington, D.C., and a lot of the Washington establishment loves him. So, and war is the thing, it's the worst thing in human history. It's the thing I care most about. It's the thing I'm most passionate about. It's the thing I want to avoid more than anything. It is what I'm now devoting much of my career to. I'm writing my new book about this, and so I mean, and my son is 18 years old. So, this is personal. Yeah. Well, let me just quickly tell you kind of what happened to me in the military. And, so I went in as an officer, which officer basic is not real basic. So I always give credit to the enlist. But, at that time, it's not fair to say I was uneducated. I had a bachelor's degree. I was at Princeton getting a master's degree, but I was a kid. I was 23 or 24 or something like that. And I quickly, having never had anyone point this out to me, I quickly figured out what they were doing. They were demonizing the enemy. And that's something that I now understand, having done a lot more reading and a lot more living at 41. That's what always happens. That's how you get people to kill people and think about people, is that you demonize people. And I remember
the lectures, because Officer Basic is mostly lectures. We call it death by PowerPoint. It's mostly just class. Then you march around for 5 minutes, and then class. Because they don't want to break you down like they do the enlist. All right, this story is getting longer than I wanted to. Anyway,
no, it's interesting.
It was harder. Now I have a little kid, and I would definitely never want to deploy now. But even if I didn't have any of that, I couldn't buy into the yay rah rah, because this was a handful of years after 9/11. I was in college. I was actually had my political science class that morning, and I just remember the teacher just being beside himself, and we just had the coverage on, and I mean, it just so. The little bit of flag waving was okay with me, but it quickly became obvious to me they wanted me to think of these people as not human. And so I've said this with a previous guest, but I've never been to Iran. But here's my belief about Iran. The vast majority of the people in Iran want to go to work, feed their kids, enjoy the soccer match, and go to bed. Mm-hmm. Because even though I do this show, what I want to do is I want to go to work, hang out with my daughter, watch a little Netflix, maybe, take a class from your, and then go to bed. Like, I'm not constantly thinking we should go kill all those people in Iran.
Right.
We should bomb the shit out of somebody in North Korea. Like, and I think that, but that's what, if you're trying to whip up, whether it's a Roman legion or, let's get out of this trench and face this hail of machine gun fire, in the First World War, you have to sort of have that. And so that's even in basic training, I could feel my mind turning. And I just thought, well, my job is not to make political hay. That's not what they hired me to do. So I did what I was hired to do, but by the time I left, I knew I wasn't going to be able to stay for a career.
It's interesting you're talking about sort of essentially a class conflict between the officers and the enlisted, right? And I'm now writing about the Vietnam War, and I'm writing the section on fragging. And how during the Vietnam War, there was open, obviously, class war within the U.S. military.
Sure.
And we don't know the numbers yet. It's fascinating stuff, but more than 1,000 officers were assassinated in Vietnam by their own enlisted men, right? and we're talking. It was a whole elaborate thing where they would get a warning usually. It's like someone would send off a smoke grenade next to their bunk or something, and that was known by the officers. Don't send the men into the field tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And by the way, this was a strike. This was a strike by the soldiers in the Vietnam War. This was a refusal to go into the combat, into dangerous missions. That's what they were doing. It was not just a personal thing with the officers. There was some of that, but it was mostly just they didn't want to go fight in the Vietnam War, right? It's to me, I think it's just one of the most heroic things ever. I'm sorry, but even if it involved having to kill your officer, these guys were sadists, and they came from often middle class, upper class families. They were highly educated, and the enlisted men were, disproportionately black, overwhelmingly working class and poor, and a large chunk were drafted, and the average age was 19.
Right.
So.
Well, there's a reason that you recruit.
I know which side I'm on.
Yeah. Well, there's a reason why if you're an enlisted recruiter, you're going to inner cities and you're, and again, I always feel like I'm a poser talking history to the history PhD, but so the British commissions you could buy, and it was the upper class families, and you couldn't really rise above your station in the same way, and the enlist kind of put up with this. I was a little different in the chaplain corps because you're not a combat officer, so like it's illegal for me to carry a weapon. It's against the Geneva Convention. So like when we used to ruck out, I used to have to carry water. And all the chaplains, that's a typical thing. I actually knew a chaplain who was a ranger, had ranger tabs, and he had to huck water over 50 miles up over the mountain, and he was, you can't carry a weapon. So, and the other thing too is that the chaplains get go against the chain of command. So they said to us that we had every right to approach the president himself and say, we don't think that.
Can I get more water, man? I'm sorry.
Oh, sure.
We know that we don't have to go through the chain of command. That we could literally have walked up to W and said, "Sir, I don't think that this war is right." Now, you'd have never gotten anywhere close before you did that, but that's what we were taught. in chaplain school. So it was a little bit different. But I'm not sorry that I served. I was basically raised. My grandfather was my primary father figure, and he had been in World War II. So which is one of the things that we're going to move on, because I can't wait to talk to you about some of this stuff. So I grew up with this World War II, yay, rah, rah, everything is very just. We took out the people. The Germans were machines.
That was my dad too.
The Japanese were animals. And so it wasn't which again is not a bad segue, because when I started hearing this stuff about the Iraqis and the Afghanis, I heard the language of my grandfather's generation. We weren't killing people on the Japanese islands, and my grandfather was in San Diego, but I mean of people in that. My stepmother's father, he was in the Japanese, he was in the islands, and he got, they were dug in, and I mean, so, but he would even say they weren't people, they were monkeys. And it was like, and to me, being 10 or whatever, I was like, well, he's just an old man, he's whatever else. But I mean, this demonization of the enemy is something that is.
There's a very good chance that he at some point possessed a Japanese skull.
I've heard people talk about that.
This was very common. Teeth, skulls, bones, whatever. This was very common. It was in Life magazine. Time magazine would show pictures, often, of people's collections of Japanese skulls. It was there was a mass demonization. There's a great book called War Without Mercy, written by a great historian named John Dower. It's about exactly this, the demonization of both sides, actually. That's one of the great things about that book. It shows how the Japanese demonized Americans and Americans demonized Japanese, although he is certainly, as am I, more or less not on the side of the Americans in this one. I'm not saying we're partisans of the Japanese, but we are certainly not on the side of the Americans. But so yeah, that was certainly the case there. Germans have been demonized in many ways. They were demonized in a particular way in World War II, which essentially created this new sort of political correctness. Racial liberalism was invented to fight that war, to justify sending our boys from Iowa all the way across the ocean to fight in this war to defend these people they'd never heard of and weren't related to, right? Not to say that, of course, that any of that was good, but to say that we should have a massive world war in which 65 million people die,
right,
was necessary. That was the motivation. And so they hired anthropologists, actually, very famous anthropologists, Margaret Mead, Ruth Benedict, Franz Boas, and others, to write propaganda pieces, to do psychological warfare, to study these other cultures and write and lecture about how the Germans and the Japanese were particular kinds of people who were not racially wrong, but their ideas were fundamentally wrong, and this justified killing them. This, by the way, is somewhat similar to Sam Harris, right? That his idea that Islam is fundamentally wrong, and as so long as people hold those what he calls bad ideas, they have to be dealt with militarily because they can't be dealt with rationally. There's no negotiating with them, is the argument, right? And that was the argument about the Japanese and especially the Nazi Germans. So there was a demonization of Germans then. There was a demonization much more racialized during World War I of the Germans. The Hun was portrayed as an ape, just like the Japanese were portrayed during World War II as apes and monkeys and monsters. And then with Islam, yes, I mean, this began, back with the Rambo movies back in the 1980s, right? The terrorists started to become Arabs in the 1980s and 1990s after the communists stopped being the villains in all the Tom Clancy movies, right?
Yeah.
By the late 80s and 1990s, it was suddenly you saw a shift, and the skin color of the bad guys in the movies became brown, and they became Muslims and Arabs, right? And so I'm not the first Rambo, but one of the Rambos, he starts fighting Arabs. And I think that was one of the first movies that where the Arabs became the villain. But there was certainly a shift in Hollywood, and that's really important. By the way, Hollywood is now doing a little bit less of the Arab demonization and doing much more of the give the CIA a blowjob job. So I don't know if you saw what's his face, the Jack Ryan actor.
Oh yeah, I saw the headline. I saw the headline. I didn't hear the thing, but yeah.
I was creeping through your Twitter feed.
Yeah, so I tweeted it. Yeah, it wasn't. I just tweeted it out, but he gave this long 30-minute interview, I think, recently. He's done a few interviews recently about this, about how much he loves the CIA and how much we all should love the CIA. I mean, it's. And so, and of course, Hollywood's all behind the Russiagate nonsense and hysteria and saying that the CIA and the FBI are the real truth tellers in this society and should be followed and we should respect their authority. This is from liberals.
Right.
And leftists in many cases. I don't even know what to say about that except I don't like the taste of vomit in the morning in my mouth. So, no, it's terrifying. My palms actually get sweaty thinking about this because it's really a return to the Cold War. The Hollywood in the 1950s acted like this. Hollywood in the 1950s was on the side of the FBI. They worked actively with the FBI and the CIA, just like they are now, to make movies, right? To demonize various people, right? To demonize communists in particular. And even many people who were just left wing, were demonized and denied jobs and discriminated against because they were seen as too close to communism. And of course, we had not a Cold War, we had a hot war. The Cold War was a hot war. Began with the Korean War. We killed hundreds of thousands of people and slaughtered innocent civilians and children, by the thousands in Korea. People don't know this. Korean War was the use of World War II tactics and weaponry, in essentially a colonial war. So it was a shooting range. It was shooting fish in a barrel. And also those poor Koreans were caught between the Chinese, the Soviets, and us. So there was just guns and tanks and planes and bombs just flooding in on both sides from every direction, right? And what it ended up in is we, the United States, sealed in that little piece of that peninsula, right? So we have this military, encampment on one side and the Soviets and the Chinese on the other side. They can't go anywhere. And also they have had very good reason to believe what that regime has told them, which is that Americans want to kill them, right? Because we killed a whole bunch of them. We killed an entire generation of Korean men, right? And so that's why the Kim regime has had any credibility, is because we launched that horrific war again, that murderous genocidal war. So we created a prison state. We created North Korea with that. Yeah. And demonization was a central part of it.
Right. And using Hollywood is not doesn't start there. I mean, plays and everything back before we had electricity. You use the popular sort of media of the day to get your point across. I mean, it's
what's that cat's name? John Krasinski. John Krasinski. So
it's from The Office.
Let's do this. I mean, we need to go. I mean, people that may not know this, but the CIA was formed during World War II as the OSS, right? It became the CIA essentially, and it was run. And the histories have been written of this. Is many historians have said this. This is not just me, but it's a gangster mafia outfit. I mean, it is the president's private army. And how do I know this? Harry Truman said so. He said, "Hey, I now have more power than Genghis Khan and Julius Caesar combined. I mean, I am now the most powerful man on earth because of this thing that's been given to me. Not just the ginormous American military, but he had this new army that he could do anything with by fiat. You obviously don't need congressional approval, right? And you're not supposed to get it, in fact." And so over the next, what has it been, 70 years now, right? That's exactly what's happened. Every president has used the CIA to kill people in our name across the world, and we don't even know in many cases what they've done. But what we do know is astonishing, So killing people to change regimes that we didn't like, overthrowing the Mossadegh regime in Iran in 1953, which kicked off the war on terror.
Sure.
That's you'd think the Russians had anything to do with our politics. I mean, that was a direct intervention, and just got disgusting, and people died because of it. And in Iraq, 7 years later, there was an attempted coup to replace the guy we didn't like there, the head of the government in Iraq. And one of the 20 assassins that were hired by the CIA to do that was a dude named Saddam Hussein.
Right.
So the CIA gave him his career, started him out, and then that failed. And a couple of years later, they brought him back. They got the job done and put him in power.
Right. One point,
the CIA put Saddam Hussein in power.
We armed Osama bin Laden at one point, right? Too. I mean, didn't Osama bin Laden? Wasn't he? Yeah, we helped with him too.
With the Soviet Afghanistan.
Soviets were there. Yeah.
When the Soviet Afghanistan war, the Mujahideen, which we now know was largely made up, much of it was made up of what became Al-Qaeda fighters and leaders, and including Osama bin Laden. Yes, we gave them, I don't know if he was in that war, but he was certainly part of the Mujahideen who became Al-Qaeda. Yes, we gave them more weapons. We gave them money and weapons and guidance and help and support and vocal support. Reagan loved them, right? As did Carter. Yeah, so the CIA, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. The history of the CIA is nothing but a catastrophe. It's nothing but dictatorial, murderous, unconstitutional gangsterism across the globe. Yeah. I mean, in fact, what did Krasinski say about how they've done all this good? And name one thing that CIA has done for us that's good. I mean, it's impossible. It's impossible to think of anything that they've done that's good. Now, maybe they'll say, "Oh, there's something you don't know about," but they do declassify, after a certain number of years. So we do know exactly what they were doing now for, I think, up until the 1970s, and it'll take your breath away. I mean, the number of attempts often successful to just remove democratically elected leaders around the world alone. Just that, right? Allende in Chile, I mean, it goes on and on and on. Guatemala, I mean, it was, Arbenz in 1955. It's endless. Every year they're doing something that just is astonishingly authoritarian and imperialistic. No, it's the CIA should be abolished tomorrow, should be abolished today. And for Hollywood, and the liberal class, the educated liberal class to be saying these things, and how the FBI apparently should be determining who the president is. Do I need to say anything more?
Yeah. Hey. So when Thaddeus Russell runs for president on day one after lunch with the inaugural, no more CIA, which means all the movies have to pick a new
maybe no more
thing.
Inaugural.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think the executive needs to exist, and it certainly doesn't need to exist as it does now with all that power he or she has. Unilateral power to destroy the entire world 10 times over in 5 minutes.
It's a lot. And
I'd say that's a lot.
And it's in the hands of a reality TV star.
It's in the hands of whoever.
It's idiocracy in real life.
Well, so that's we might want to think this democracy thing too. I mean, I'm serious. And especially in a country this big with that big of a military. So we know the political knowledge of Americans is not the greatest.
Yes, I would agree with you on that.
We know this because many studies have been done, showing what people know about politics and especially world politics. The percentage of what's the percentage of Americans who know what Syria is or could identify it on a map, right? It's probably, I'm sure it's single digits percentage, And to think that we bombed them recently, right, and have been funneling arms into there and contributing to killing lots of people in that country, that I'm sure more than 95% of Americans are completely unaware of. I'm sure most of them don't even know about the military conflict there. I'm sure they're not even aware of the Syrian war. I mean, it's that deep how ignorant Americans are. We know this. It's really, really bad. And that we give those people the vote to determine who has the power to kill everybody on Earth 10 times over in 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. Let's run through that again in our brains. Yeah. We give those people, Americans, right, who watch 8 hours of television a day, and I'm not denigrating that. I want them to do that. I love that. I love leisure, as you know from reading Renegade, right? I love pop culture. Love that. I love what Americans do. But giving them that kind of power to determine that shouldn't be. And also this idea that because I happen to be, just by dumb ass luck, to be born inside the United States, I get to decide who gets to live here.
Right.
Who gets to cross over from Mexico to California. That's the craziest thing I've ever heard of. That's just sort of like some mystical thinking. That's like mystical nationalism. It's blood and soil thinking. It's Nazi thinking. You're born here, therefore you have a right to determine who lives on this landmass that starts in this arbitrary place that was decided by war of conquest.
Right.
Are you familiar with Lawrence Lessig's TED Talk about Lesterland?
No.
So
he was on Rogan recently, and Cooper sort of introduced me to that podcast. He talks about how how many people contribute the maximum amount that you can, and how many people, kind of what you're saying, don't really know what's going on, and it'd be the equivalent of saying like everybody named Lester in America would be the only people that had any real power.
He basically just dives into how how much money in politics. He just kind of lays it out how screwed up the money in politics situation is, and by the end of a couple hours of listening to him lay it all out, you're left feeling pretty hopeless, unfortunately. But
so what's the solution if it's not voting for the president?
Well, I think first of all, I think Lessig's analysis is completely stupid, but I mean, okay. It's the money in politics argument makes no sense to me. So Citizens United, the Supreme Court decision, which basically said that it's okay to donate to campaigns, that was at the time, this is before the 2016 election, right? That was said by the left to be the end of American democracy and the end of any hopes of having any outsider candidate having any chance in American electoral politics, right? They said at the time, I forget what year that was, but it was well before 2016. They said at the time, there will never be an outsider candidate who can run for president ever again. There will never be someone who's like bucking the party establishment who will ever have any power, because it's only going to be corporations will be deciding who's the president. Well, guess who the leader, other than Hillary, right? The other two most popular, successful candidates during that last election were Donald Trump, totally self-funded, and Bernie Sanders, who took no corporate money.
Right.
Okay, so Lawrence Lessig and the Citizens United, panic attack people. Let's think again. Let's think again. I think the evidence shows just the opposite of what you believed. And by the way, climate change, really, we're going to be underwater in 20 years? I don't think so. Sorry.
No, there's
a lot of religious thinking that goes on the left, is what I'm getting at here, right? And it's sort of like, and I live in the Bay Area again now, so it's like living inside of a cult.
Sure.
And I am not, let me just say that again, it's like living inside of a cult. I have very educated, very intelligent, lifelong friends there who believe that we will be underwater by 2030. And are teaching their kids that, or maybe 2050, at best. They're teaching their kids that. They're having strikes in schools where they tell these kids, you're all going to die in 50 years unless you go on strike today and go protest in the streets. And then they do die-ins in the streets where they have the kids pretend to die in the streets.
Yeah, I missed that. And somehow here in Iowa, I don't know if we've gotten that.
Oh yeah, no. This is going on in liberal land.
Die-ins,
in liberal land on the coasts. This is exactly what's going on the liberal land on the coasts, meaning the big cities, San Francisco, Seattle, Los Angeles, New York, Boston, Philadelphia, all that, where the educated elite lives. This is what they're doing to their children. They're teaching them that if they're white, they're going to die by climate change, and if they're black, they're going to get killed by cops. Right now, it is true that, way too many, which would be one, people are getting killed by cops, but the number of black men killed by cops is like double digits. It's a microscopic fraction of the number of deaths there, so it's like grossly blown out of proportion. Now again, no one hates the cops more than I do, don't get me wrong. I mean, I think, but I don't need to get into that. I'm not defending that at all, but the hysteria, the religious thinking about these things, right, the lack of analysis, the lack of rational thought, which now I'm sounding sort of like Sam Harris, but it's anti-intellectual, which is where I'm still on brand here. It is a really scary problem, and then you add in the Russiagate hysteria, which they all buy into as well. And then we have John Krasinski, these people in Hollywood saying that we got to go to war with Russia, that Russia declared war, not declared, they waged war on us. This is what the Hollywood liberal establishment has been saying openly on MSNBC for 3 years now. Okay. Rob Reiner, nonstop, and all these guys on MSNBC for 3 years now. Russia waged war. It was an act of war. That's kind of language they used.
Didn't Hillary say it was an act of war?
Sure. Yeah. So this is okay. All right. So
good. I'm not completely
crazy. as much of a mass murdering piece of shit retard Donald Trump is, are we sure we want to rush into a Democratic presidency really soon? Because those guys are going to go to town, I believe. I think free speech is going to be, I don't think the First Amendment will be the same when the next Democrat is elected president.
Yeah.
And this is not an endorsement of the Republicans. You heard what I just said about Trump. Okay. I don't think there should be a presidency. So now we know where I stand here, right?
Yeah.
But those Democrats it's just like, to me, it's just when I look at party politics, it's like I'm just sort of like evaluating the difference between a tiger and a lion. Like which one's going to do more damage to me in any particular moment, right?
Not to cut you off, this is all just so fascinating to me, considering like you were saying, you got a lot of hate. Your pinned tweet is the muscle guy comes up and says, "Can you?" His pinned tweet is, watching UFC at Buffalo Wild Wings with my son, some muscly guy comes up to me out of nowhere and says, "Hey, you're Thaddeus Russell, right? Can you explain to me how gender is a social construct?"
Nice.
Just hilarious. But all
it's
of
totally true story.
Criticism of the left, it's really interesting to hear your take. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's one of the things, again, to be a fanboy for a second, is that, whenever I hear your lectures or I listen to your podcast, is that I feel like I can't put you in a box, and I like that. Because I'm not sure what you're going to say next, but it all seems to be well thought out. And
you can put me in a box. It's just a very, very tiny box.
It's a small box.
It can only fit one person.
So just again, real quick. So no presidency. So then how would you then see the country being run?
Oh, I didn't mention this. I also want to dismantle the United States.
Okay.
I mean, and this is becoming not such a strange idea either. I mean, there are secessionist movements across this country, and especially after Trump was elected, right? Remember, the left was talking about seceding. California was talking about seceding. Right. I was like, go for it. Have your little social democracy in California by yourselves. I mean, let's see if it works, honestly. 350 million people should not be in the same country. That makes no sense to me at all. That's terrifying. I am terrified of the existence of this behemoth, which, with whoever these morons want to pick as president leading it, and that military especially, and the power to keep, to seal off the borders, and God knows. I mean, we could destroy any part of this human society on this earth in any way we want at any moment. We can do anything in terms of economics or the military, or war. I mean, we can do whatever we want. We can wreak havoc. Thank God we've only killed about 200 million people so far.
I think one of the scariest things is the rapidity of it. So if you're Napoleon and you want to invade, you have to get those troops together.
Let me think about that a second. 60. So I'm going to say the United States is not solely, but I would say substantially responsible for about 100 million dead.
Okay.
So if you take World War I, World War II, obviously the United States wasn't responsible for all the deaths, but I do, in my new book, I argue that they were responsible. U.S. intervention in those wars made them into mass wars, into global wars, and that's undisputable.
Sure.
Indisputable. And then we have Vietnam, we have Korea, we have the Middle East. I mean, and we don't even know the numbers, but it's going to be somewhere in that range. Yeah. So that's a pretty heavy toll, guys. The American Empire. Let's think about that again. Yeah. So sorry.
Well, no, it can happen so fast. It's not like, so now it's you push a button and the country is gone. I mean, it's not like you have to spend weeks, making sure that all the farmers get put up in their militia and the swords get sharpened and, off you go with Napoleon, into battle. I mean, and so for a lot of my life, I've sort of thought of America as that dickhead in high school that has a lot of money and he, therefore he sort of gets a lot of credit. But we're not a very old country, but because we have a lot of money and we have a lot of power, militarily, we can push anybody around. We don't have the age behind us of some of the countries that have been around for a long time, to have the wisdom to kind of say, hey, maybe we should slow our roll here, and so might makes right. It's always kind of seemed that, and we all had that guy in high school that, was kind of that dipshit that everybody kind of kowtowed to. And I've always kind of, if you look from a 10,000 foot view, it seems like that's what America does. You've got to kind of please the big country, because if not, then what? I mean, you're going to be ignored at best and you fucking destroyed at worst, right?
Yeah. Arnold Hirschman wrote a book called Voice, Exit, and Loyalty, social scientist, very important book. And in it, he argues that there's essentially sort of two ways or three ways you can make social change. Okay, so one is through what he calls voice, which is the democratic process, participation democratically, and that's what he favored. Loyalty is that's not seeking social change. That's being conservative in a fundamental way. It's just obeying orders and deferring to the authority figures. And then there's exit, which is my favorite by far. No, it's my only choice, and I want as many exit routes as possible from where I live. Right? Wherever you are, wherever I'm sitting, I want as many exit routes, as many doors out as possible. That means you want more countries to go to, not fewer. So the bigger the countries, the worse. The smaller the countries, the better. So we want to devolve. We want to decentralize. This country is way, way, way too big. And so the smaller it is, the better. So, you name it, name the division and I'll accept it. If Texas wants to go, great. I don't care if they establish a Christian conservative republic where abortion is illegal and whatever they do to women. I mean, that's up to the women and the people of that place to decide, right?
Sounds like The Handmaid's Tale.
Well, what happens in The Handmaid's Tale? There's a revolution, suckers. So good luck to you. And by the way, the men do not enjoy their lives very much, do they? They're getting their hands chopped off. They're deeply repressed. Sure, they get to fuck the handmaid, whatever. But other than that, their lives are miserable. And that's what's so great about that book and that movie. That TV series, I thought. It was not actually the feminist, crazy, shrill, harpy stuff. It was actually I thought, a really good demonstration of what really patriarchy does to everybody. That kind of, to men and women, right? It's really so damaging to everybody. But yeah, there's a revolution. So yes, if Texas wants to secede and try to do that, try to establish a Handmaid's Tale, good luck to you. Good luck to you. I'm not going to help you. And I don't think you're going to last, but fine. And then if California wants to secede and have an LGBT socialist republic, great too.
That's where the good party's going to be.
But then I would say that's just the beginning. Then let's cut California in half. Because that's too big of a state. That's a country in itself. My God.
Don't they say that California's economy is the seventh or eighth biggest country in the world if it were by itself?
And if we Californians, not me, but Californians kept the military assets that are in there, in any significant amount. I mean, that's going to be one of the largest militaries on earth, right? The bases we have in California, boy, we could kick a lot of ass, right? And so, so I'd say cut that in half too, because that's starting to scare me already. It's starting to sound a little like Israel, which can do a lot of damage. So let's cut that in half, north and south. But I think even there, there's no reason the Central Valley should be the same state as San Francisco, and I can keep going, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so why does, Des Moines and Iowa City, like in this region right here, why should this be even the same part of the rest of Iowa? I mean, clearly, you have agriculture, which is a totally different culture, totally different political economy than the cities here, right? Where it's like high educated tech is coming in, you have like cosmopolitan, and that's saying nothing against the farmers of Iowa. Right. I'm descended, by the way, from some farmers in Iowa.
Sure.
So I have roots in Lamoni, by the way.
Yeah.
Okay. And then my other part of my family was coal miners in Iowa back in the early 20th century. Socialists, by the way, socialist unionists. Not that I'm proud of that, but let's devolve constantly and always put pressure. That's the constant political campaign should be to devolve.
Could that ever really happen, though?
What do you mean? There was a thing called the Civil War. There are civil wars all the time. There's splitting of countries every day.
So the USSR breaks up. One of the things I think is funny is people that are, and my father's family was Italian, and people that get really proud of Italy. Italy hasn't been Italy all that long.
Well, right? I did say there was a civil war, so that was unsuccessful though, right? And more than 500,000 people died because of that. So the United States has demonstrated a really serious lack of interest in allowing people to split. So it would be interesting to see what would happen if any kind of major portion of the country did split off. What would be the response by the United States? But that to me is it, right? The smaller, the better, because they're going to be less powerful, less able to do damage to the rest of us, and more exits, more choices, more options, more places to go if things go sour where we're living.
If you can do that. So once again, we're at a place now where, and I wish you could come back in a week when I had more time to think about that, because this is making my brain happy to think about these things. At the same time, that scares the shit out of me, what you just said. There was a TV show called Jericho.
Makes me happy.
There's a TV show called Jericho where a bunch of nuclear weapons went off strategically in a bunch of big cities, and they cut it after 2 seasons, so we never did get to find out what happened exactly. But I think they were in Kansas or something, and so the town's fortified, and then like they're raiding each other and trying to kill each other over resources. And so what's to stop Texas from not having enough, California to have enough water, so then deciding that we're going to go and fuck up Nevada, right? And take the prostitutes and the water. I mean, I don't know, like take the Hoover Dam over or something.
It's not a terrible question. It's not an unreasonable fear. And it is in line with essentially a large section of scholarship on this, on the nuclear arsenal and sort of the nuclear position of the United States, which is that the argument is, and I think it's a very reasonable argument, but needs to be thought about, that the existence of the hegemon, right, the United States as a hegemon, worldwide hegemon for the last 70 years or so, is the reason for relative peace during that period. Although I don't know, I mean, it's been pretty nasty in the last 70 years too, since World War II. But yeah, I mean, it does make sense that there's certainly stability. I think that might not exist. We don't know. It's hard to know. We don't do counterfactuals, but it's a reasonable argument that the existence of a relatively stable hegemon, right? We've been stable. Our political culture until 2016 has been uniform. I mean, every president has towed the line on foreign policy. There's been basically no significant difference of opinion among Democrats and Republicans at all about what should be done globally, right? Since ever, actually, since the founding fathers, in fact. Forgot where I was going with that, but we need to not. I mean, right? We have a nation of idiots deciding who should have their finger on the nuclear button.
Right.
It's unilateral power there. If the president deems that there is a clear and present danger to the United States, they can push that button and Asia will be gone.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean,
not what the founders intended, I'm sure.
I believe the United States now has 11 nuclear submarines. I think maybe it's 11 or 12, something like that. Maybe it's more. No, actually, maybe it's 19, something like that. Each doesn't matter because each sub, this is just a single sub, has the nuclear firepower to destroy an entire continent.
Holy shit.
Yeah. The Trident missiles. Mm-hmm. I think one of those can take out like much of Southeast Asia, and each sub has, I don't know, 8 or 10 or 12 or something like. So it's one submarine can kill everybody in Asia in 5 minutes.
I just don't get what the point of that would even be.
Well, it would be, who knows? I mean, hey, when Trump was elected, I liked a lot of the things he was saying about foreign policy, because he was actually calling into question regime change and endless wars and wars of choice, and basically he's calling into question imperialism, which I was like, wow, this is something else. I got a tingle, actually. A presidential candidate who's actually talking this way. But he was also talking about we must wipe out ISIS, must finish the job, which he apparently did, by the way. If you look at the casualty rates in Iraq and Syria right after he took power, they spike. I mean, Obama started it, the ground war,
Sure.
Wiping out ISIS from those cities that they were holding in Syria, like Raqqa and Mosul. And he was already killing civilians. We don't know how many. By the way, totally uncovered war in the media. I mean, these were ground invasions of cities with 1 million people in them. You think we didn't kill some people who were, innocents? Does anyone even? I don't even know about this. It's completely covered up, right?
Yeah.
But we just had a ground war. We just took 2 cities away from ISIS fighters, who were, we know about how they fight, right? So I imagine it was pretty merciless and nasty, but right? We don't even know about that. That's really gross. That's really, really gross that the media didn't even try to cover that, apparently. So forgot where I was going with that, but end the American Empire, I guess, is where I was going with that.
Yeah. It's heavy stuff for sure. And I'm with you a little bit, which is I don't know. I can't imagine the chaos that would ensue and the talks.
I remember where I was going. Sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, because I was about to. Yeah. So China. That's where I was going with it. So Trump says some good things about the empire, but then as soon as he takes over, he really goes off on the ground war in Iraq and Syria. The good news there, at least, is that since then the casualty rates have plummeted. So I think he actually, and he said this, I think they've actually gotten the job done. I think ISIS has been routed and have left and is essentially a non-entity, and those places have been restored to essentially U.S. and Syrian Iraqi control. I don't know, it's better than occupying them endlessly, I guess, but, it's still nasty. But then worse was, or at least scarier for me, was what he was saying about China. Okay, so he had a hard-on for China from the get-go, and he even had... he had some sort of third-rate academics write, believe it or not, a semi-academic piece, I think in like Foreign Policy or one of the big foreign policy magazines. There were 2 like Trumpian political scientists that were somehow dug up. There were 2 of them in the whole country. They found him and made them write an article, and in which they laid out the case for a long war with China, in which they laid out the case for a massive buildup. This is one of the planks of Trump's campaign, by the way. Massive buildup of the Navy, the Pacific Navy in particular, and constant patrolling of all the sea lanes. And then, he had his eye on the South China Sea from the beginning. And so you don't mess with the South China Sea and not piss off the Chinese big time. I mean, that's the major water route that controls Asia. So and that's really where the war is going to start between the United States and Asia and China, is I think over the South China Sea. And this is, I think, pretty much every political scientist who studies this agrees with me on that. That's the point. But it doesn't matter. He believes that China's a threat long term. It seems to. This is certainly the way he was talking, right? Thankfully, so far he hasn't been belligerent in his position and his sort of attitude toward them since he's taken office. But boy, he was scaring me. So if you get someone in there who really, really wants to go at China, which could be either party, that could be anybody in this country, right? Because, hey, our Walmart is full of Chinese goods, what about American jobs, damn it? Right. By the way, Bernie Sanders is right in line with that, right? People should look this up. He wanted to ban imports from China.
The stores look different.
The Bernie people and the Trump people have a whole lot in common. Bernie's anti-immigration, he's anti-trade, anti-foreign trade, and always has been. And he is not, and he's for continuing the war on terror. He's for the drone war. And by the way, they're protectionists, and Trump's not opposed to some social welfare measures, right? What's the difference exactly between these guys? So
yeah.
So on China, like that's terrifying, and we're going to allow Americans again whose knowledge of China, Chinese politics, the Chinese government, the history of China, what its intentions are, the ideology of the ruling party there. Americans don't know a goddamn thing. I want to know what they're up to, what their plans are, what their motivations are, right? They're up to a lot, but they're going to be a superpower. They're already an economic superpower, and they're on the verge of becoming a military superpower. They have, I think now, 2 aircraft carriers. They're nowhere near the United States, but they're on their way, and they certainly have the money and the people to build pretty much any military they want, and the engineering and the technology. They got all that. So if they want to do that, they can. So we should be studying the shit out of the Chinese right now, and we should also be trying to be their friends, because they've done nothing in their entire history that was belligerent toward the United States or Americans. Nothing. They have zero. Nor have we with them, really. Well, sorry, with the Korean War, we certainly did, but we started that. We invaded that peninsula. We invaded Asia, not them, right? You could say they invaded Korea, but that's right next door, right?
Right. It wasn't like they landed in Seattle and said,
yeah, we flew across an ocean. Yeah, we went way out of our way to fight there.
So if we follow the Russell plan, though, and we break up the country into X number, so the country now becomes 6 countries, doesn't that make it easier for the Chinese to become the global superpower, scary, bear that you just described?
But what? I'm not scared of China. I'm not scared. I'm scared of them less than the United States. I mean, again, like their belligerence toward me is nothing. Like all they want to do is sell me stuff. I have no beef with the Chinese, even government at that point. I don't want to live there. If I lived there, I would be their the greatest enemy for sure. But I don't see them coming after me except to sell me stuff at Walmart. God bless them.
I'm going to use that as a great segue into one of the things that I wanted to bring up with you, of things that I've heard you say that kind of blew my mind a little bit.
Sure.
And one of them, because I grew up again with my grandfather hearing about World War II, was that Hitler was going to take over Europe, and then America was next. It was going to be the global empire of Germany.
Yeah.
And in one of the classes of yours that I took, you talk about how that was never the plan. That Hitler knew when America got in the war, his life was over. That it wasn't this sort of global conquest idea, and I kind of grew up with that idea. So that was sort of one of the times that Thaddeus Russell blew my mind. So tell us about that.
I mean, I can just say to you, you can believe me or not, but that it is virtually pretty close to a consensus among scholars of the Third Reich that, yeah, it was never Hitler's plan. In fact, he wanted just the opposite. He wanted to be friends with the United States because he understood that we could destroy him. He knew that, so he wanted to avoid that. And what he wanted was to just simply for Germany to be a global power, and to be able to negotiate with other powers on an equal or superior basis. But he never had any plans, certainly, to attack the United States. He wanted Roosevelt to be an ally. He wanted Churchill to be an ally. He was begging them to be his ally, in fact. All he wanted was Lebensraum, open space, living space. Now, only, involved the invasion, occupation of Poland and Western Russia, and the murder of all the people who got in his way, which was one of the bloodiest wars in human history. So don't get me wrong, Hitler was, among other things, a clear mass murderer and imperialist of his own. But his empire extended only to Eastern Europe. This is basically a consensus among British, German, and American scholars of the Third Reich. I mean, I don't think you'll find too many who will argue against me on that.
Sure.
There's one guy at Columbia, I think, who's made this argument, but very lamely. But most people agree on this. So what he wanted was Lebensraum. He wanted to invade and take what he thought of as taking back Poland and Western Russia, which he thought of as historically, Germanic. And this is where he really had a very solid claim, and a just claim, I think. Wanted to take back what was absolutely stolen from Germany after World War I,
right,
with the Paris Peace Accord and the Versailles Treaty. I mean, there was just people were separated from their families, from their communities. They were made from German citizens into Czech citizens, a brand new country that was created overnight by the great powers and imposed on them. I mean, what the hell is that?
Right.
And this was universal among Germans, by the way. Communists agreed with the fascists, who agreed with the liberals in Germany, that this was a terrible injustice, and Germany needed to get back those lands, and those people needed to be repatriated, right? And that was his primary beef, and that's what he also, I mean, in addition to Lebensraum. So that's what he wanted. And those lands were all had been in Germany or Poland, so it wasn't, and Czechoslovakia, right? So it wasn't even, that was the extent of his empire. He did not want to take the West. He did not want to take Western Europe, and he certainly didn't want to do anything against the United States. How do we know this? Guess how many landing craft were in the Wehrmacht in 1941?
I'm going to guess there were none.
0. Okay, landing craft, right? How many troop transport ships were in the German Navy? 0. Okay? I mean, the German Navy was a speck, a flea compared to the British and American navies. Mm-hmm. They didn't even try much. They had a little bit of U-boat action. That's all they had that could do any damage. But U-boats were tiny little. These are not invasion forces by any means. These are just little pests, right? In a massive war, they are. They can sink a ship, but that's it, right? So again, like, you know, they never had any intention of even attacking America or Britain until they were forced to. They invaded the West because they needed the idea was, and again, this is scholars across the board agree with this, they wanted a solid Western front. They wanted to stave off France, which was an ally, right? And they wanted to, then Britain had already dug in trenches all along the border between France and Germany and Belgium. There were dug in British trenches with German troops in there before the war even started, right? And so they invaded to wipe out the British and destroy the French threat and to establish a beachhead on the western flank of Europe so that they could move east. It was a defensive position. It was a defensive move. And again, this is, historians agree on this. Right. So it was never his long-term intention. He also was opposed to colonization. He wanted to give away the German colonies. He did not want to colonize other countries, especially in the third world. Why? Because he was a racist. This is why racists can actually be useful, because racists historically have been anti-imperialists. Why? Because you don't want to mix. Imperialism requires mixing with all the brown and black people in the world, right? And when you have an empire like that, look what happens next. Those brown and black people end up in your home country. It creates a bridge between the home country and the colony, right? So yeah, I mean, there was. And then we can get into the Holocaust, if you want to talk about that, right?
I do. And this is why I dig what you do, because so I'm not a history major. I don't have a degree in history, but I think that I'm a relatively educated person. You know, I grew up in Iowa. Sure. You know, I went to a really good high school. I went to a good undergrad. I have an Ivy League master's degree, and I went to Duke for medical school. And I'm a sort of a history.
You know what you're not? You're not a typical American.
Okay, right.
No, I mean, you're probably, I mean, and this is less meant as a compliment of you, but more just like you're probably like 0.01%. I mean, in terms of political knowledge, right? I mean, would we agree? I mean, I think all three of us are probably, that's how bad, I mean, and that's not saying how great we are, but it's saying how bad Americans are.
That's why when I listen to people like you and Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris, I feel stupid all the time. I guess I don't feel like a 0.01%. But anyway, my point is my point is like I love Ken Burns documentaries, and how is it that I believe everything that you said about it's a consensus, but I never heard that. And so just to make the story short, my stepfather's family were Polish Jews. They made it to Des Moines. The whole rest of their family was wiped out. And so I grew up with stories of the SS coming and taking them away, and the Holocaust, and working in the factories and all that. And so one of the things you talked about Wilbur Carr's anti-Jewish policies in 1933, and said in one of the classes of yours that I took, this is the biggest mind blow of any of the things I've ever heard of yours. And if we would have had more time, I don't know if we're going to have it, I would love to talk about the slave thing. But the Holocaust could have been avoided with immigration. Both Great Britain and America refused from the Third Reich to take the Jews, and that led to the Holocaust. The Holocaust could have been avoided is like, I had to pause the video, Thad, and like take a breath. Cool. So hit me.
we got about another 20.
Okay.
So yes, again, multiple books have been written on specifically this topic about FDR's refusal to admit Jewish refugees throughout the Third Reich from 1933 to 1945.
God, that's just, I mean, but
there were essentially, with a tiny handful of exceptions like Albert Einstein and other scientists who were useful for the war effort, they thought, with the exception of a tiny number of those, there were no Jewish refugees admitted to the United States in any significant numbers throughout that period. And this is true for Great Britain, France, all the Allies. It's true for every country on Earth, because there was a conference held in the late 1930s in Evian, France, in which representatives from most of the countries of the world arrived, and they discussed what to do with the Jews who were under threat inside the Third Reich. And this was before there was any mass killing of Jews, by the way. They had denied their civil rights immediately, stole their property, were harassing them into leaving. That was the Nazi policy, was to harass the Jews into leaving, and then also to establish exits for them, to help them leave. So they found a place known as Palestine, and they started to ship Jews, help Jews move there. And tens of thousands of Jews during the 1930s were assisted by the Nazi regime in moving to what became the State of Israel. Yes, the Nazi Germany co-founded the State of Israel. This is, again, not even a controversial claim. We all know this. The seed, certainly, the basis of Israel was helped by the Nazi regime. They collaborated with Zionist organizations. This was a collaboration with the worldwide Zionist organizations. That was Nazi policy from the get-go. Hitler had said this since he was a young man. He had said, what we need to do is march them out of this country, not kill them indiscriminately, or even discriminately, like the dumb Russians did with the pogroms. He thought that way. He called that the anti-Semitism of emotion. And he said, Nazis are better than that. We are rational. This is the anti-Semitism of reason. You need to march these people out. If you just start murdering them, it causes chaos. It's going to bring on, most importantly, military conflict with other world powers, potentially, which he most wanted to avoid. So he said to the United States in speech after speech, and most famously in his so-called prophecy speech in 1939, he said, if you don't take our Jews, you humanitarians, you lovers of the Jewish people, he's talking to the United States and Britain and France, right? Mm-hmm. If you don't take our Jews, and if you stop us from taking the land that rightly belongs to us, right, in the Rhine, in Danzig in Poland, and in Poland and Western Russia, stolen from us, if you stop us, then we will kill them. Yeah, then we'll kill them. So that's the deal. So he was holding the Jews as hostages.
Yeah.
Right? And what FDR and Churchill said was, nope, we're taking you out. Why did Roosevelt and Churchill want to take out the Nazi regime? Was it because they loved Jews? I mean, Roosevelt came from a famously anti-Semitic family. You know, the United States was overwhelmingly anti-Semitic. It's not even shameful to say that you were related to an anti-Semite at the time, because everybody who wasn't Jewish was anti-Semitic pretty much in some way or another. And the Roosevelts were famously anti-Semitic. Roosevelt was on the board of Columbia University and voted to establish a quota for Jewish students who could be admitted. Outright racism against Jews. So no, and the State Department, as you know from my course, and it's in my book, and many people have written about this, was just like overrun with anti-Semites, and they were adamant that no Jewish refugees should be allowed into the United States from Nazi Germany, from the Third Reich, ever, from 1933 to 1945. Yes, if we had allowed Jews, there were only 6 million of them, right? Or, well, 8 to 10 at some point, but whatever, doesn't matter. We had more than enough capacity in all these countries to let all those people live. Every single one of them. Yeah. And if we had not sent our military in to stop Hitler from invading those 2 countries, yes, gross atrocity. I mean, no doubt about it. I mean, that was war crimes of the highest order. But by entering that war, we changed what was a regional war. And by the way, going to war against Japan, picking that fight, we can talk about that too. The United States transformed a regional war into a global war. So yes, millions, a few million people certainly would have died in Hitler's invasion of the East, which culminated in Operation Barbarossa, which was the worst sort of war, discrete war in human history to this point. No doubt about it. But that was, one totalitarian regime fighting another totalitarian regime. I mean, that is what will happen. And all you can do is say, God bless the people there. Many of them were on the side of those regimes, most were not, and you simply have solidarity with those who are not. We transformed those regional wars, which were bad enough, into a global war that ended up killing at least 65 million people. We're still revising that number. So in every corner of the planet, pretty much, except for certain parts of Latin America, certain parts of Africa, we were there on the ground, and also providing arms from the beginning through the Lend-Lease deal, flooding the Allies with big stuff, big machinery, big equipment, big guns, big planes, bombers, bombs, everything. We armed that side. during the war. And by the way, many of those arms ended up in the hands of the Axis too. But just we flooded the world. That's how the war was won, was mostly by us putting the killing machines in mass numbers, unprecedented numbers, into the world. And so there were no concentration camps, there were no death camps, there was no extermination of Jews until December 9th, 1941. So the day after the declaration of war by the United States on Japan and Germany.
Right. Another date that should live in infamy.
Is the very first day that they were gassed in a town in Chelmno, Poland. That was the very first extermination camp. And it began the day after the United States declared war on Germany.
Right.
The prophecy was delivered.
And the concentration camps were built for Germans. The Boomelauten.
Indeed.
You said in one of your lectures, and that one didn't blow my mind as much as the Holocaust piece. But I wrote that down because, again, these are things. And my point wasn't to throw my resume out, but to say I think I'm a fairly educated person, and the fact that I've never heard any of this. I mean, to me, growing up the way that I did, I mean, even though we sort of had these peripheral Jewish in-laws, for lack of a better term. The Holocaust has this ring to it, like it's illegal to deny it. Hitler, I have this joke sometimes I say to patients when I'm just trying to chuckle around with them, like in a way, what did people say before Hitler? Because anybody who's bad, it's Hitler, they're Hitler, and Mother Teresa's the good one, and unless you're Christopher Hitchens. So it's like, oh, the Holocaust, he's Hitler, Trump is Hitler, Schiff is Hitler, everybody's Hitler. Before Hitler, what'd they say? The Kaiser? But even if it was that, then what before that? Nero, Caligula? I mean, this feels like it defined my grandparents' generation, and therefore it's sort of this thing that's bled down into our society, that the idea that it could have been avoided by, I don't know, have them come to the Midwest. I mean, yeah, okay, so LA is a seething ball of people and pollution, and I've used to live in Manhattan, not live in Manhattan, from Brooklyn, and lived in New York, whatever else. But I mean, it's not like there's not enough space, and I guess
especially in 1941.
Right, exactly. Yeah. It's just mind blowing to me.
The population in the United States was, I think, about half of what it is now, right? And so
I've never understood.
We had more than enough space. Yeah.
I've never understood anti-Semitism, and I've asked a few people, because it's not a conversation you can have with most people, because they, white people are terrified of sounding racist at all turns, and we've had that conversation with a couple of guests I've had on that are black, and I had some friends in the military. We used to talk about that, like, wow, white people are just terrified of anything that could possibly. But I've never really got anti-Semitism, because I don't know. I don't even know what the basis is, and unless it's religion, you go, what, Jews are annoying? Well, are they? I mean, any more so than anybody else? Like, why is it that Jews are targeted? And you can even say it was before the killing of Christ. I mean, why is anti-Semitism such a thing?
I'll tell you why.
Yeah, hit me.
Well, there's a few reasons, but I think there's some fundamental aspects of Jewish history that have made them a target. So the fundamental thing about Jews, until the state of Israel at least, is that they have been a stateless people for millennia, right? Stateless, like the Palestinians are now, which, for a lot of people, especially with the rise of nationalism in the 19th century, when everybody became identified with their nation all of a sudden, which is a new thing, by the way, which we should get rid of immediately. I'd argue that, it is the most lethal ideology in human history is nationalism.
Okay.
I mean, I think that's killed more people than anyone. So if you look at the histories of just take the 19th and 20th centuries, that's when we started really mowing down people. And it was all over nation states. It was all over the integrity and the honor and the supremacy of certain nation states, right?
My flag color versus your flag color.
Yeah, I mean, I know people think Genghis Khan killed more people, but that is bullshit and a half. Anyway, I'd put the 20th century up against any other century. Thank you very much, Mr. Pinker. But sorry.
Jews have been a stateless people.
Jews are stateless people. That's number one. That makes them suspicious, especially with the rise of nationalism. Who are these people? What do they want from us, right? Number two, the Jews have traditionally been an intellectual culture, right? And for various reasons, but it's a religion based on the text and multiple interpretations of the text and rabbinical scholars, reading the text. So that causes suspicion. These are people who are like thinkers, and they seem to be smart. And if you're insecure about your intelligence, they're going to be worried about them. And then they have chosen, because of their treatment, they've been forced into ghettos and cities. I'm talking about over centuries, right? Mm-hmm. And because of their intellectual abilities, they took on, retail trades, certain industries. They became dominant in certain industries that were public facing, right? So if you go to any city in this country, or any city in most countries, right, or certainly European countries, there were stores, often called the Jew stores, right, or the Jew store, and then doctors, right, another thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Very public facing professions, retail, and so you put all those things together, right? Think about Korean store owners in like LA, right? Ask them how they've been treated. Similar, right? Very public facing, suspicious because they keep to themselves, They seem stateless because they're immigrants, right? They get their asses kicked. There's tremendous racism against Asians, by the way, on the West Coast still. It's just that, unfortunately, it's mostly black and brown people who are taking it out on them. There's basically almost a war in the streets, by the way, in Western cities that no one talks about, between black youth mostly and Asians, random Asians. Recently there was a horrific attack on a group of Chinese in San Francisco that no one talks about, because it was like 3 young black guys, and it's ridiculous. But so Jews have had that position in many societies, right? The outsider, the eternal outsider, the stateless, commercial, intelligent, in the professions, public facing. Yeah, that's a big target.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's definitely the best answer I've ever heard, because everyone just kind of avoids the topic. But I always have this,
and they're trying to take over the world and
right.
and bleed the goyim dry.
Well, I think that's where the reputation, comes in, right? So if they're smarter, more intellectual, they can sort of like bilk you in a deal if you're an idiot in, medieval Europe, and it's like, oh, I got taken by the Jewish guy, and it's usury because they were bankers, right? So we're going to loan stuff out. And I mean, they sort of it feels like they've been a convenient punching bag, for a long time, when it's like something's happening. What should we do? Well, let's persecute some Jews. That's always popular. Like, let's do that.
So then there's a fourth reason, or maybe it's 5. I forget how many I've given. I think it's a fourth reason, that is the responsibility of some Jews. Now this is where some Jews, I think, made a big mistake, which was after World War II. Well, it began before then, but it took off with World War II, of deciding that the Jews needed a homeland, in the middle of the Middle East. Mm-hmm. And so come 1947, there's, worldwide movement to establish a Jewish state right there in Palestine. And this came to the Truman administration, and there were 2 members of the Truman administration, Clark Clifford and another guy, I forget his name, who made the case for the United States recognizing and supporting the State of Israel when it was established. And the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, and the National Security Advisor all were opposed to it, adamantly. George Marshall, arguably the most famous, most respected general in American history, and that's saying something. Certainly one of the top 5 or 10 in American history. That is saying something, right? He was respected, within the military establishment, within the political establishment. This was George Marshall after World War II, right? Mm-hmm. This is the Marshall Plan guy. This was like the leader of the U.S. military. So he said, Marshall and James Forrestal and most of the Truman cabinet said, so there's a few 100,000 Jews in the Middle East, and there's about 60 million Arabs. How do you think this is going to go if we choose the Jewish side?
Right.
If we put all of our resources into establishing by definition, a segregated Jewish state, right? A Jewish state requires apartheid. You can't allow Jews to come into the state, non-Jews to come into the state and become citizens. It will cease to be a Jewish state. That's the logic of the damn thing.
Sure.
Okay, I'm not saying it's morally wrong. I'm just saying you're going to be in a lot of trouble if you do that in the middle of the goddamn Middle East, right? So the idea of doing it in Argentina, which was floated for a while, made a lot more sense. I still think there would have been trouble, but if they'd established it in the jungle in Argentina, there would have been much. But in the middle of basically a Muslim empire, right? You're going to have, Marshall said and Forrestal said at the time, you're going to have endless war. You're going to have endless war if you support that state. Guess what we got?
Yeah. Endless war
so far,
and a holy city held dear by the Muslims as well as by the Jews, right in the center of it.
Right. And so, how many Jews in New York City and Los Angeles have been killed by Arab terrorists in the last 50 years? Almost none.
Right.
How many Jews have been killed in Israel by Arab terrorists and Arab militaries? Tens of thousands. Well, I think we've proven which is the safer homeland. Brooklyn is way better than Jerusalem. Thank you very much.
Right. Well, I mean, so again, a bit of a rough segue, but just speaking of New York and immigrants and so forth, Thaddeus Russell blows my mind. The Irish, the Italians, and the Jews are Negroes.
Yes, they were. Not anymore. I wish they were. I wish they still were.
So again, I mean, we talk about these constructs that get thrown around, and you get hate from a guy at Buffalo Wild Wings for. But I mean, that's one I think you mentioned on one of the Rogan shows, but it's definitely in one of the lectures I saw of yours. So I mean, my father's family that came through Ellis Island. So so in the early 20th century, my family were Negroes.
Mm-hmm. It's funny that you and I are both. What are you, a quarter Jewish? Or half?
I'm actually no. Well, I mean, no Jewish that I know of. Was my mother's longtime boyfriend, his family. So that's why I said in-laws. Yes, then
I'm a quarter Jewish.
Okay,
but since you and I look alike, I thought it was kind of funny. But anyway, yes, before World War II, well, before the Civil War, the Irish were considered by many people to be either apes or Negroes. That was the main debate. We knew they weren't white people, but we weren't sure whether they were simian or Negroid. And they were treated as such. They were denied jobs. They were denied housing. In fact, African Americans, they're called Negroes at the time, were actually preferred by many landlords and employers over the Irish before the Civil War. So we're talking about 1830s, 1840s, 1850s, with the first big wave of Irish immigration. No Irish need apply, very famous phrase that was actually used and deployed, by employers, and it was tough. And Irish lived with blacks in black neighborhoods like the 5 Points in New York City. They were really good at dancing, really good at drinking, really good at fornicating, not so good at working. Were known for blowing up projects they were working on if they weren't given enough whiskey by the employers. My peoples. Yes, they were identified very, very closely with blacks, and blacks, of course, were identified with apes, and apes were identified with not being human, and so they were treated as such, right? Now that changed after the Civil War. During and after the Civil War, the Irish went under this incredible assimilationist campaign to prove that they were good Americans, so they became cops. Right. They got jobs as cops in all the big cities on the East Coast. Firemen also, right? And politicians in the Democratic Party. So you're like a Democratic politician, you're a cop, you're a fireman, you're starting to look like a good American. Then they started entering the war, the Mexican-American War, the Civil War, and then the imperialist wars of the turn of the century in the Philippines and Cuba. And by the 1910s, they were considered to be, by scientific racists and by policymakers, to be not just white, but to be Nordic white, which was the top white, the top European race at the time that was believed to be. So that was quite a change, quite an impressive accomplishment. At the same time, after the Civil War, the Great Immigration Wave happens, from Southern and Eastern Europe. So you got a lot of Jews and Italians and Russians and all those coming in, and they too were considered to be either black or simian. And so there's actually a famous book called The Jew is a Negro, written by Arthur Abernethy, who was, I think, a social scientist, journalist kind of guy. 1906, I want to say. And that was a common sentiment among social scientists, and not sentiment, belief, and argument that Jews were, again, either African or just not white, and same was said of Italians. They were, the first wave of Sicilian immigrants was to New Orleans in the late 19th century, and they were lynched, they were discriminated against, and because they had all these characteristics that looked a lot like black people. They were, again, very sensual. They were good at music and dancing, and they co-founded jazz. Sicilians were a major part of the early jazz scene with Louis Armstrong and Kid Ory and all those guys in the early 20th century. And there were, the first recorded jazz record is the Tiger Rag by the Nick LaRocca Band, 1917, all Sicilian band. Yeah. It's serious, Dixieland jazz, and so, Louis Prima is another one, a famous Sicilian-American jazz musician who actually passed for black because he talks so black.
Right.
And he was denied a job in New York City because they thought he was black.
Yeah.
And so, and then with World War II, though, Jews and Italians, Americans sign up for service and they support the war, especially Jews for obvious reasons. But then Hollywood understood, as did the Defense Department, the War Department at the time, that we needed a whole lot of people to fight this thing, So they had to make Jews and Italians white. And they also had to convince the rest of us that this was a war for these people who are our brothers. Jews are like us. And so they invented this thing called the Caucasian race. Those anthropologists I talked about earlier who helped justify the war, that's one of the things they did. They invented this category called the Caucasian race, which included Jews. And they said this. So white boy in Iowa, those Jews in the shtetl in Poland, they're your people. Go fight for them. Go die for them. And that got over. That became very powerful. So Hollywood movies started to portray Jews and Italians as assimilated. And a lot of Hollywood movies that were war movies would show like a troop or a platoon that was just totally multi-ethnic. Right? It's famous. You may have seen a lot. You look at any World War II movie from that era, right, from the 40s and 50s. It'll be like the Italian guy from Bensonhurst, fighting alongside the Jewish Nebuchadnezzar guy from Manhattan, with the farm boy from Iowa, right?
And they're all teasing each other, but they all save each other. And
exactly, they become brothers by the end.
That's right.
Band of brothers.
Well, I was thinking about that because they actually get in a fight in Band of Brothers early on. They get in a fight in the barracks because one of them accuses the guy they don't like of being Jewish, and then the other guy who is Jewish, they get in a fight, and there's even the joke that the two guys are playing cards and the other guys are fighting. They go, what are they fighting over? They go, they're fighting over Strobel or whatever. And the one guy goes, great, that's how we should be spending our time, is fighting over Strobel. Or whatever it is.
So that's the origin of racial liberalism. And then at the time, blacks were kept out of combat units, but they were allowed into the army. They were drafted, and almost every black person who served in World War II was drafted, which is why black people don't think it was their war, and God bless them for that. But 2 years later, 1947, Truman desegregates the armed forces entirely, so the assimilation and integration is complete, and racial liberalism as the dominant ideology takes hold. So we now believe what we believed then, which is that there are three races basically. Or four maybe, whatever. But it's the Caucasian and Negroid are the main ones, and then the Asiatic race. And that was what those anthropologists during World War II argued that. It's an absolutely absurd construct, right? All three are completely absurd, right? So if you look at Caucasians, right? So like Russian Jews, are the same race as like blonde Swedes, who are the same race as Portuguese, who are the same race as the Greeks, who are the same race as British people and Germans and all, it makes no sense. Africans, right? Really, Somalis, you guys know what Somalis look like around here, right? They're the same as Congolese, who are the same as Egyptians, who are the same as Moroccans, who are the same as South Africans. I mean, what?
It's preposterous.
Just look at them. I mean, listen to them. The languages, culture, religion, behaviors, faces, colors, everything is different, right? Yeah. Why on earth are those the same races? So Asian, that's my favorite one, right? Like the Asian race, really? So Indians and Pakistanis are the same race as Koreans. Oh, and Russians. Remember, half of Russia's in Asia,
That's right. Yeah.
Who are the same race as Mongolians, who are the same race as Thais and Filipinos, and Tongans. Get the fuck out of here.
I got made fun of in my fraternity in college once because I referred to one of our.
That was my Italian American moment.
Forget about it. Fucking forget about it.
Fuck out of here with that race.
I got made fun of in college in my fraternity because I referred to one of our brothers as Asian, and they all started laughing at me in the meeting, and they go, "He's from India," and I went, "Asia? I mean, India's in Asia." Right. Geographically challenged motherfuckers. That was literally the quote, and then they all started.
Well, no, they're ideologically challenged. They believe really, it's an ideology, right, of race, that we believe that bullshit. It makes no sense. They're like, Mexican, like, what the hell is that? That's a race? It's a country, dumbass. And then even within Mexico, like, go to Mexico, look at the people, like, they're just everything.
Yeah.
Totally diverse. Anyway, so race is right next to nationalism as the most lethal ideology, I would say.
I wish we had hours and hours more to talk. Dude, I could do this all day long. I can see why Rogan had you on 3 times and didn't even get everything talked about. There's so much more that I wish we could do, but we're bumping up on time for both you and for Cooper. So what we always like to do at the end is just give you the microphone. We will link everything we can down below, but tell them where they can find you, how to get more of you, and then we'll wrap it up.
So thaddeusrussell.com is a good place to start, but very soon they should go to renegadeuniversity.com. We are launching a new website, new platform, new membership program, new courses. We have Hollywood people doing filmmakers making our courses now with us. Cool. So they look great, and we have tremendous graphics with them. And we have courses by me, Daniel Coffeen. We have all kinds of courses that people will really love. And they should go there. That's it. And then I have Twitter. Thaddeus Russell is my handle. And that's really it.
Excellent. You should do a class on the CIA. I meant to say that earlier, but we got talking about, just because, again, the ones I've taken of yours, you have this great way of kind of presenting the history and then kind of deconstructing. Again, my list of times you blew my mind, we didn't even get close to. But, sort of these things that I think we all kind of accept, because when you have 20 minutes 3 times a week in 5th grade, you get George Washington was great, America. Fuck yeah. Nationalism is this thing. I mean, so it's definitely would encourage anybody to check out Thad's stuff again, and
thank you,
and the podcast and all that. So we do call it Conversations with Interesting People, and so I always say to the guests at the end, if there's anyone interesting that we'd love to get in touch with them and sort of have them on the show. And anybody listening, this is for you. It's a platform. We want to talk to everybody, and so if there's topics that we didn't cover, I'll try to find an expert. I'm having a hard time getting academics to come on for sure, because they're all afraid of getting fired from the University of Iowa. But I'm working on a bunch of them. And
I'll tell you who you should have on.
Sure. Yeah, hit me.
Maggie McNeil.
Okay.
From Seattle, sex worker. She's probably the leading sort of public intellectual in the sex worker movement.
She was on Unregistered.
She's a good friend of mine. Yeah. She's been on Unregistered a few times, and she teaches a course for us too on the politics of sex work. So Maggie's brilliant. Started out as a librarian in outside of New Orleans, and became a sex worker, but she's never stopped being an intellectual, a writer, a blogger, and an activist, and she's great. And she also one of her clients is an American Airlines pilot, so she has
nice.
I think it's all right to say that. And so she has free tickets to anywhere. Maybe we should cut that out. But anyway, have Maggie McNeil on. Yeah.
If you give me your contact information after the show, that'd be fine.
Sure.
Actually, funnily enough, there was a story in the Des Moines Register not long ago about I think she's an attorney. Yeah, a woman who's an attorney who moonlights in Nevada as a prostitute.
There you go.
And she has a family and a little kid. And I reached out to her several times and never did hear back. But
Maggie will explain to your audience why us being excited about that is the opposite of sexism and patriarchy.
Right.
That sex workers have been at the forefront of women's liberation for centuries.
Totally. God, I wish we had more time to talk about that, because he and I were talking about my experiences in Belgium when I was a young man, and sort of just seeing how different cultures were on there. All right. So anyway, Thad, I can't thank you enough for coming. It's been such an honor and a pleasure. And everybody listening, we'll see you again for our next one not long after this.
Thank you, Adam.